one of you that's a PhD student here has applied for the MHI PhD scholarship, the process of selecting a scholar for this year. So thank you all for applying. Now, the event that we have today is actually the first time we're hosting it, but in previous years, every year that we do this, there is a two-phase process to the MHI scholar selection, where in the first phase, a committee of faculty are examining the applications and making a selection of a subset of those applicants to give a talk. And this talk is a little unusual that we are asking the MHI PhD scholars to present, because it's a relatively short talk compared to what you might give in your qual exam, for example, or even talks you might give at a conference sometimes could be longer than this. Typically, I think we restrict about 8 minutes or so. And so that's one way in which it's different. The other way in which it's different, of course, is the audience is not just people that work within your immediate field. You're going to see in the audience PhD students, postdocs from all over electrical and computer engineering, faculty from all over electrical and computer engineering. And so the talk is challenging in a way to compress a lot of what you're doing in a short amount of time and present it to a really broad audience. And based on our experience from previous years, we thought it would be really helpful to have a few pointers, some tips, and Professors Sandeep Gupta and Professor Urvashi Mitra are going to give you some of these pointers and tips based on having judged this competition in previous years. And our hope is that that'll give you a little bit of a sense of what to think about if you make it to that second round and you get a chance to give a presentation. And I don't know exactly where we are in the process in terms of the selection for this year, but if you get accepted and get a chance to give that presentation, fantastic. The tips here will definitely be useful to you. And if for some reason you don't get selected and give that particular talk, I think these pointers are still going to be useful, because if you ever go to interview, whether it is an industry research environment or in academia, being able to summarize your research very well and present it to a broad audience very quickly is an important skill. And I think, from that perspective, you'll all benefit from the tutorial today. So I am really glad that all of you have joined, and thankful to our two faculty colleagues for coming in and giving their suggestions for how to formulate this talk. So I guess I'll hand over the floor to whoever's going next. I forget if it's Sandeep.
It is Sandeep, since he has to leave a little bit early.
Okay.
Okay, so I can, so I think Bhaskar set stage very nicely, and for some of my remarks, I'm going to try to remain, give you sort of maybe 4 or 5 broad brush ideas, input from my side. And this is informed by serving on this committee, but also being involved in recruitment, because eventually, we sort of think that this group of people are students are particularly, looking for opportunities in academia. And so as a department chair for 6 years, managing recruitment for the department for the system side. So that's how basically that's the background on this thing. So I think 8 minutes is a short format, and you need to really pack a punch. The question that actually we struggle with is that one of the things that actually we struggle with is understanding the uniqueness of your work. There are topics that are sort of a lot of work either ongoing or has happened in the past. That doesn't make those problems uninteresting, because there are those problems are sometimes really important problems, and people have been hammering at it for a long time. And I remember a faculty candidate who impressed me a lot actually worked one of those classical problems, but he presented it by saying, this has been an open problem since 1970 something. And that, and I solved it. I think that's, I didn't understand. I think if you ask me really hard, I can remember the problem. I don't remember his solution. But he presented it in that way, is that it's a classical problem. It has been open for a long time, and I actually solved this problem. And not only I solved this problem, there was a conjecture that was made about this problem, and I demonstrated that conjecture was actually false. So because that conjecture was being used as a heuristic for people to actually use as a practical tool, and turned out that the conjecture was actually false. So it was sort of important, not only because it explained, it actually proved a theoretical result, but it also sort of displaced a practical guideline that had been emerged as a heuristic in that problem space. So that's a clarity if you're working on a problem that is long-standing. What if you're not working on a problem that is long-standing and open, but a problem that a lot of people are working on? You need to basically distinguish yourself from the other people working on that problem. You need to, and sometimes basically in the committee, we have had these discussions saying, this guy presented it, but I am aware of this work going on over here, that work going on over here, this thing. And I can't tell how this particular student's work is different from that. What are the particular either change in assumptions? What are the change in slight subtle changes in goals? What are the key ideas that are fundamentally new? Because you could be working on the same problem as 100 other groups, but you could still have a very clearly new defined directions. So that is something that is basically, then you have to essentially, if you're working on a problem that a lot of people are working on, you have to distinguish yourself from other approaches that are there intellectually, in terms of whether it is, in terms of ideas, in terms of methods, whatever, and in terms of results, different types of problems are weighted differently. Those kind of things are weighted differently. So that could be basically that's something that we actually have struggled with as in this position. And that struggle also, when we recruit faculty candidates, a lot of times we basically have had the same struggle. Yeah, they presented it and it sounded very nice, but there's sort of these other methods and it's not clear how it is different from those, how we are this thing. So, that's the second thing. The third thing that seems to basically sort of influence is this a problem that is sort of something that is going to, so I'll start with a maybe 1 minute disclaimer. There are multiple ways to think about a PhD thesis. One way to think about a PhD thesis is it's a practice problem that is used to train your mind. And if you look at it that way, it doesn't matter what thesis topic you pick up. You could pick up whatever thesis topic you wanted, as long as you hammer at it and do get a lot of intellectual training and your results are not significant. I don't actually personally care. So if you think about PhD as a training to do research, this is a practice problem. But unfortunately, when you come to a presentation like this, we are not looking for a practice problem. We are looking for a problem that is basically where that piece of work is of interest by itself. It's not just something that trained you. So that itself creates a certain burden on you, which is really that you have to demonstrate that this is something that is going to be expansive in scope in the future. It's not just what you have done, but the promise that it opens up. So that becomes important. It's not important in the first type of practice, where PhD problem thesis is a practice problem, but it becomes a problem that is interesting in its own right. And it's not just that you have put a full stop on it, but you just started the sentence, and the sentence is going to continue in the future. So with that, I'll shut up. I'm sure there'll be more things we'll talk about when you have questions.
Great. So I'm actually going to share my screen. It's not that I have a serious presentation to give you, but I find this helps me remember the points that I want to make. One of the things that I would actually like to ask, oops, sorry, I'm having screen issues here, is that I've noticed, oh, here we go. So I see a lot of you here, which is great, but I also notice that most of you do not have your cameras on. So I'd like to encourage you, if you can, to put your camera on, because this in a way is part of what you want to be comfortable with, right? Which is being comfortable with being seen, allowing us to cue off of your facial expressions. Are you understanding or not? I'm essentially going to be repeating what Professors Krishnamacharya and Gupta have said, but perhaps with a slightly different perspective. This set of questions that you see here are the set of questions that I actually ask everybody: prospective PhD students, prospective postdocs, prospective colleagues, and my own students when it comes to the writing up of their work. And as an exercise, I would encourage you just to take the questions and write out answers to them so that you have a response, right? So why is your problem area important? And even if you're a theorist, there will be applied or experimental people in the audience that will want to know what your real world application is. And especially if they're struggling perhaps with some of the mathematics that you're presenting, at least they will have this application as something to connect with, to understand why you're working on the problem that you're working on. And specifically, what was the problem or the set of problems that you actually set out to solve? Why was this problem challenging? What were the hurdles that you had to overcome? What was the most difficult thing that you had to do? What were your innovations? And very importantly, what is the impact of the work that you did? And a way of thinking about this, and I know it seems very lofty, but to ask yourself, what was impossible before you did your work? Now, the half question, which I actually is my favorite question, is what was surprising about your work? Because I maintain if you set out to solve a problem where every step that you engaged in was predictable and the answers were predictable, then you didn't have to seek out to solve your problem in the first place, right? If you already know what the answer is, why are you going through the action of solving the problem? And oftentimes, some of the biggest innovations or next steps that we take come from a surprising outcome of the work. Okay, so those are my 5.5 W's. And as I said, I truly do ask these questions of all of the populations that I talked about. So this has already been mentioned, but the evaluators are quite diverse. We have experimental people, we have applied people, we have theoretical people. And so I would encourage you to practice this talk with friends of yours that are not in your area. They don't necessarily even have to be ECE. They could be physicists, they could be biologists, they could even be English majors. I mean, if they understand the big points of the talk and are able to repeat it to you, so you might need to make sure you ask them questions afterwards, then you will know that you have conveyed your ideas properly. Having said that the committee is relatively broad, don't take a look at what you think the committee roster is and design your presentation based on who you think is going to be in the audience, because I can warn you that the committee will change, and I've often been brought in as a pinch hitter to evaluate talks at the last minute because there were scheduling challenges. Also keep in mind that because of the format and because of the audience, there's just not enough time for you to give the details, right? So if you had some great theorem that you proved and it took you 4 years to prove it, you're not going to be able to repeat that proof in the 8 minutes, right? The people won't understand it. And what you really want to emphasize again was what was important about this, what was challenging. Speaking for myself, and I do more theoretical work than applied or experimental, I am personally often challenged by slides that have a really large number of pictures, like, okay, I designed 55 chips and I'm going to show you, the layouts of all of the chips. These slides that are super busy are just hard to follow. And so just think about this, like, parse your slide, try to understand, try to think about what are the points that you want to convey. And making a list of the points that you want to make, whether you put them on your slide or not, is a useful activity. And that's actually all that I wanted to share.
Great. We've heard a number of useful pieces of advice from both Professor Gupta and Professor Mitra. And I think, we're going to keep it somewhat open-ended here and let you all ask some questions. What are some questions you have about the format of this competition, about any of the things that you heard them say? And just, let's have a bit of a discussion around it.
So if you want to be a faculty member, a really important characteristic is being interrogative and asking questions. I will actually tell you that when I interview faculty, if they come in and have no questions for me, it's not a good sign. So in an effort, to help you with this, think of something to ask. It can be extremely specific, or it could be very general.
Hi, Professor. I have a question about the content of details in the presentation. As you mentioned that we can even rehearse our presentation to an English major person. That means that we cannot really share a lot of details of the technical part where they may feel confused about. So in that sense, what kind of level of details do you recommend when we mention about the detail, or we just mention everything about the background, about the motivation, about the future impact, and nothing about the detail?
You want to present detail in the following way. It does need to be broadly digestible, right? So again, giving one of my examples, if I gave you 15 equations and I haven't defined any of the parameters, and I assume that you'll be able to look at it and understand why it's important, that's not very good, right? So let me ask Yinghua, what is your area?
Oh, my area is in hardware security, especially finding hardware security solutions in the supply chain. Okay.
So what kind of detail would you like to provide that my comments have now made you concerned about?
So the detail might be, probably I would like to talk about specific attacks or specific defense method that is on the way of my career, and then how I address those threats, and how I develop a systematic framework that evaluates all the defenses and try to figure out which one is better than others in different scenarios. That's probably the detail I want to bring. Yeah, sorry.
So I would say already you have a really nice, concise description of what your research is about, right? And somewhere in the beginning, you want to have these sort of bullet points there so that even if I don't understand the details, I'll remember the big picture. You can, of course, give some technical details. And my bringing up the English major was to say, if that English major could walk away and repeat what you just said, even if you provided technical material that went over their head, you will have succeeded.
So it's not the absence of technical material. You can have technical material, but technical material supported by, you make clear a level of understanding, so Professor Mitra is, knows security from a information theory point of view. Professor Krishnamachari, which is very different from the hardware security of the supply chain you're describing. Professor Krishnamachari would know it from the networking and maybe those perspective. I would have some more overlap with you, even though I don't work in the area. I'm more familiar with the computer engineering aspects of security that has basically emerged in the last 20 years. So we would get different things out of your presentation. I may understand some of the details, but everybody should understand the aspect of the problem. So the question is, can you tell at the same time to somebody who's an English major that why this problem is important and why this problem was challenging, and why your solution is unique, and why your solution is powerful? Can you describe that to an English major while not insulting the information theorist or the network expert or the computer engineer in the room? Right.
So the point is not to, have a talk that is the lowest denominator. It doesn't have to be that it's only understandable to an English major, no one, with more background, but that people should be able to get at least that level of takeaway from your talk. And then those that can understand technical details should be able to appreciate what you have there.
And you'll be surprised when you say generality, people who are also far from your field will push you. Why is it general? How do you're claiming this to be general? In what sense is it general? They will push you. So some of the details that you will not even provide, you will be pushed. Trust me, 8 minutes, you talk for maybe 4. We talk for 4.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, we let them go through the entire talk.
No, I understand.
You talk for 8 minutes, we talk for 4.
We do talk for 4. We
Yeah.
don't shut up. I mean, so we take extra time, but we basically do talk for a period of time, and we will push you on that. And even people who would least expect would ask you those questions. So some physicist in the room will basically say, "Yeah, generality in what sense? Is it this thing?" So not absence of detail. I was just talking to, because my next class is actually a colloquium for second year undergraduate students across the university, across Viterbi schools. So and I was talking to a colleague and was saying that, oh, should I keep it general? I said, no, you can keep it general, but also throw in some of these important details, because there'll be 8 students from your discipline who will get really excited about that detail. And, you have to blend it. You have to blend it, because there's going to be, the 70 students are not in BME, but there are 8 students who are from BME, and their eyes will light up when you start getting into the details. So you have to do both.
Well, it's also provide the details, but give the interpretation, right?
Yes.
So you can have things at multiple levels. We didn't say this before, but I think now that we're talking, we would all say this. Definitely practice your talk and keep it under time. So you will get cut off. This happens quite a bit, actually. And oftentimes you put your most important thing at the end of the talk. And if you've made a 15-slide talk, which I don't recommend, I can pull off 1 slide per minute, but I talk really fast. So for an 8-minute talk, it might be 5 slides, right? So do keep that in mind, but you will get cut off, because it's unfair to everyone else who's keeping to time that you are given the opportunity to give more information. It won't be considered a positive. Let me just put it that way. So.
Thank you, professors.
Good. So that was a good question, Yinghua. Anyone else?
I have a question about how is the process of the questions after the talk. So you give your talk and then you receive questions right after, or it's like a huge round of presentations and then there are questions directed to different presenters?
It's questions for each person after they speak.
So it's one at a time.
One at a time. And you give your talk, we ask questions, and then you are done.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in principle, I should note that anyone in the audience can ask a question. It's not necessarily restricted to the committee.
And is there an estimate of how much time that would take?
No, I mean, we have a schedule, but I will say, if you've been particularly vague, you might get more questions. So.
Okay.
So I think the questions is an important thing. I mean, the way I tell my students is that, listen, because they don't record this, listen to the proceedings of a US Supreme Court case. Okay. And these lawyers have basically, obviously, there is one lawyer or a team of lawyers there, but they basically have had 100 other lawyers or 50 other lawyers preparing for months and months, sometimes lifetime, for basically preparing for this case. They open their mouth, and before they open their mouth, basically the discussion is in a complete different direction. We don't interrupt you like that in this thing, but when the questions start, it will go in the direction the questions have the life of their own. They have their own trajectory. They're not going to follow your talk, okay? And so you better be prepared for basically sort of trying to understand questions, because they're going to come from perspective of somebody who's an outsider. So, if you take an information theory perspective to Yinghua's work, it's a different perspective. Yinghua has never thought about it that way. He has to think about it in the moment, in the spur of the moment, and figure that out and saying, what implication does it have? And that sort of thing, and sort of, and I don't know information theory. So how would I basically sort of respond to that? How do I process that question as an intelligent human being who may not know information theory, and at least glean something from there and essentially sort of respond to that. So I think it's important to the questions, actually how you react to the questions, how you process the questions and how you respond to them, and how you listen and process is almost as important as how you respond to it, because that will situate you in sort of a very different direction.
Thank you.
Sarath, you have a question?
Yeah, so my question was on the theme of this talk. Is it, so we didn't have a research statement as such submitted for the application. So is the talk supposed to be presenting what future research will be and what our goal in research is to be, or is it supposed to be on the work we have done and just talking about the things we have completed during the PhD so far? Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. So I'm first going to answer a question that you did not ask, and then that will help answer, I hope, your question, which is to say that in principle, you can apply for the MHI Scholar at any time during your, dissertation research. But given that in the end, we are looking at research contributions and research accomplishments, as well as potential, typically the students who are 1 year away from graduation are in a way automatically favored just because they will have a heavier CV, if you will, than a very young student. And so often, as a result, you have sufficient number of existing contributions that you can talk about. And I would actually focus on that, right? Again, it's such a short talk. I would like to know what you have done, and based on that, make a prediction about your potential.
The one thing I would say is that you don't have to talk about everything you've done.
Oh yeah, for
There's
sure.
such a variance in our PhD population of how many papers people have written at this point. There are groups where there are students that have been co-authors on 30 papers by this time. There are others where you're on, 4 or 5 papers, but you don't have to mention every piece of work you've done by any means.
You want to be able to tell a story, excuse me, right? So, because there's a setup, there's what you did, and then there's, the tying things down. So if you, unless of course you can take the work that you've done, if it's voluminous, and break it down into some themes that allow you to talk about like, for these 5 different applications, I was able to prove a common set of results. And of course the assumptions were different, but once I had the hammer, I could adapt it to these other nails,
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I think everybody works on very different research areas. So how will the judge to determine which one is more important? Like which problem you are solving is more important?
Well, you will help us do that, right? And keep in mind that the committee is diverse, and there are a series of other inputs that we've had before you get there to give the presentation. But let me rephrase it. Let's say you were giving a presentation exactly to your community. How would they know that your research problem is more important than someone else in your research community?
I think inside one community, people will know which one is more important. But outside this, so basically, when you are comparing 2 very different research areas, for example, one is in system level, another one is in device level, they are solving very different kind of problems. And when they describe their problems, you will feel probably different people have different perspectives and they will feel differently. So, yeah.
I will play devil's advocate here and say that it is definitely a little more challenging to explain the importance of your work to someone not in the community, but the same questions still come up. right? If you get a paper review, there could be one person who says, this is not an important problem, and yet 2 other reviewers who say it is. They're all in your community. They've been selected to specifically evaluate your work because they're experts, and yet, you know, importance is a question of taste, right? But here you have to work hard to help us.
Okay, yeah. Sure.
So, you know, even within the community, if people would have a good idea about what are believed to be the important problems of the day, that doesn't mean that there can't be somebody making a presentation about a problem that nobody believes to be an important problem of the day, but it actually is. And you just have to make the case at that point of time. So think about it that way. But more importantly, if you go for faculty position, and I've, you know, talked to some of the many of the students over the years, if you're lucky, you will have 2 or 3 people maybe in your immediate area in the audience, you know, faculty members. Okay. You're going to have certainly larger number of faculty members who are basically kind of much further away from your discipline.
12 to 15 of them.
Huh?
12 to 15 of them, right?
12 to 15 of them if you are lucky. If you're unlucky, there'll be only those 3 people, and then you know you're not getting hired because nobody else in the department is interested. So your people are very excited, but nobody else is interested. So you're probably not going to get an offer because everybody else decided not to show up. Of course, unless there was a gas leak in a big pipeline or something nearby.
Yeah.
Okay. So really, you have to basically, that is a burden that you have to carry, and that's a burden you have to carry. And you know, a lot of times when you go for funding, your program managers don't have expertise, oftentimes deep expertise in a particular problem you're trying to solve. So this is a recurring problem. I mean, a lot of times the decision makers, first level decision makers, definitely higher level decision makers, are not going to be experts in your field, and that's true about a faculty interview. You know, we've had cases where the dean said, well, I can't make an offer to that guy because the guy don't talk to me. And they said, but you're a chemical engineer. You say, yeah, but I know how to talk to people, and this guy could not talk to me.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, it's evolved because our hiring has, volume has increased over the years, but there was a time when our dean would meet with every single faculty candidate, and, you know, the final sign-off decision, there could be a discussion between the dean and the department chair or the group leader. I will also tell you, based on my own experience, that people often see this talk as an indicator of how well you're going to teach. And even though your goal might be a Research One university where, you know, largely your objective is to do research, especially, well, I would say at all schools, people really care about the quality of teaching these days, right? The undergraduates are some of our clients, and we have to keep them engaged, and in some cases encourage them to join the department and do research or become an engineer, you know, in our area. So this gives people a sign.
I think what we're saying is it's really an important life skill and a career skill in academia, at least, to be able to convince other people that the problems you're interested in are really interesting problems and important problems for everyone to work on, or, you know, for them to fund, or for them to hire you to work on these problems, right? And so this is a great kind of a stage in which you can practice that skill.
Okay.
But I would argue it's not just academia.
Yeah, I agree.
If you want to be a worker bee with a PhD who's told what to do, then absolutely these skills are not important. But if you want to become someone who evolves into a technical leader into your organization, a large part of your job is going to be convincing people that you have good ideas for getting resources, for picking the projects that you want to work on, for getting the company to consider, you know, a project with a particular team of people. This kind of salesmanship, backed up by facts, of course, and concrete contributions, is extremely important. So I don't think this is just for academia. So it really relates to wanting to be a technical leader.
Now, I want to add an extreme case here and put it on the table. There may be a person on the committee or in the hiring, you know, when you give a job talk at a university or at a place which allows you to grow into a technical leader, even if it may be in industry. There might be one person who may basically say, well, this is just ridiculous. This is solved problem. and how to deal with that person, and how to basically sort of make sure, you may have lost that person's vote, okay? and we do that does happen once in a while, because fundamentally, like I was just talking about this yesterday to somebody. I said, I can't watch a game because I've never played tennis or any other sport. So to me, whatever they do, it seems like it should be doable. Nothing is impressive to me when people are playing tennis. Nothing is impressive to me. Absolutely nothing is impressive to me. So there are people like that who would basically feel about your research, okay? And you just have to basically sort of work around them, and you have to do it politely, and you have to basically diffuse the situation, and you still have to reinforce. And you may think that, oh, this is lost, but you said that person is lost, but I still need to make sure that I repair with everybody else, I recover with everybody else. And so that's also a skill that you have to develop.
That could be an entirely different seminar where we go through all of the awkward experiences that we had during job hunting. I might be special, but I've had quite a few.
No, one of the faculty members, when I came here for an interview, told me, no, I don't think you should come here. He just told me, that's what he told me. That's all. I had he came late for the one-on-one interview, and that's all he told me. You should not come here. He was 20 minutes late for a 30-minute meeting, and that's what he told me.
Is this colleague still with us?
Probably information theory.
Okay.
But you just have to, so there will be reasonable questions, there will be unreasonable questions. You just have to find a way, and there will be questions that will from left field. You just have to process it. And if anybody,
as I said, this might be a different,
No, but I'm just saying. But I'm saying that it is how you react to it shows, somehow we expect. It's not fundamentally important in life for you to be a good researcher, to be able to respond in the moment. But somehow this is a skill that is deemed important at moments like this. I could take a person who completely collapsed under that kind of a question, and that person may turn out to be the best researcher that the department didn't hire. But the probability of that person getting hired is very low. That is the fact. If the person collapses in the face of such a question.
And I guess Professor Gupta mentioned this earlier, but let me just reiterate it. We do often get into this circular discussion where somebody asks a question and the presenter actually doesn't answer the question, but chooses to answer a different question. And I wouldn't recommend that. So sometimes you may not know the answer. Sometimes you might be, guessing, and it's okay to tell the audience that you're guessing. But circling back to a question that you do know the answer to constantly and not actually answering the individual's question is also something that is not favorable. So it goes back to listening.
But there is a way to pivot oftentimes. You say, the answer to that question is no, or I don't have any idea about the question you're asking, but may I phrase a question with your permissions that is slightly related to that in the same direction, and then answer it. So you can just do it directly. And if the answer is no, actually that doesn't work for that scenario, fine, just say it out. Don't obfuscate, okay? Be very clear about it. But you say, but it works in all of these other scenarios.
Right. It is key to have completely understood the question that was asked, though, yes, and address that head on before you pivot. Right.
Before you pivot, but you can pivot, and you can say either the answer to that question is uncomfortable for me because it's a negative result. I can say that, but I tell you that honestly, but it is all these other positive things. Or you say, well, I don't know the answer to that question. It's a great question. It will take me a long time. And these are the reasons why it will take me a long time to basically figure out the answer to that question. That's another way to answer that question. A third way to answer that question is, I don't know the answer to the question, but I've thought a lot about this cousin of that question. And here is the answer to that question. So you're displaying thoughtfulness and reaction. You're reacting to the person, you're interacting with the person, you're processing the information in real time, and you're reacting to that. All of those are different methods, but never avoid the question, never evade the question, never try to hide your answer to the question, never sort of get around it. Just go directly to it first and then pivot.
Hi, Professor Gupta. I have a question about that. So if someone does ask me a question that I really haven't thought about, one suggestion that I got from from conferences is that I can just say that I don't know the answer to the question. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you offline or something like that. Is that okay? Do I really need to convert that question or try to talk about something like similar to kind of save the situation, or it's actually okay to just tell them that I really haven't thought about it? I'm just kind of curious.
So it depends on how far the question is from your work. If the question is really far and quite tangential, I think it may be fine. I mean, I'll let others jump in and basically, disagree with me because, we do. So if the question depends on how this thing, it also depends on how many questions you take that, right? I mean, so if there's one question and that was really, really far from your discipline, and this thing, then it's fine. That's a decent answer. But then do get back. Okay, then do get back to them. Then spend all the time flying back home and driving back home to basically think about that question, read a little bit, think, process it, and then do get back to them. So don't let it hanging. Okay. But if you can't do it multiple times, you can't do it for questions that basically sort of people would expect you to know about because reasonably close to your discipline, so it depends on the basically several circumstances. But
I think also, especially in job talks and this kind of talk, people will purposefully ask you about some kind of extension, or what happens if I change this assumption, or will this still work under these other conditions? And 90% of the time they will realize that you actually haven't looked at this, right? They know that, but they're trying to see how you think on your feet, right? So, and I actually have to say, so I would say, I mean, following up on Professor Gupta, I would try to say something like, think for a few seconds, and conjecture something. And there have been times where I have answered something thinking about it quickly, and then on the flight home or whatever, I realized, actually, no, that's not going to work. So then I would also follow up with an email and say, upon further reflection, it's not going to work, and this is why, and, but you will be asked about things you have not thought about before. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, guaranteed.
I would say in this setting, I would lean towards not responding. I haven't thought about that. Let me get back to you later. Because if you say that, it does sound evasive. And so it's better to, as Professor Mitra said, think about it a little bit and hazard one way in which you might address it. And you can phrase your response to be tentative. Say that, I haven't thought about it very much, but perhaps something like this might work, or this is how I would go about it, or I've seen work that does something like it. Say something in response that sounds thoughtful, because it may be kind of seen as an easy way out to just say, I haven't thought about it, I won't answer it.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you so much.
I see a question in the chat from Dongsheng. I'll just read it out. He had some mic issues. He said, what kind of impact of our research do you expect to see, societal or citations or societal level? Our research results are often new to the area. How do we predict the impact?
That's a great question. I would discourage you from using citations because a lot of us have very mixed feelings about what citations mean. So you can do the big picture stuff, but I would argue that's something that might get covered in the beginning. But and it's really individual to colleagues. So I'll give you an example. This is how I prep my students for their qualifying or defense exams. If Professor Chugg is on the committee, where I say, you've done this beautiful theoretical work, you've proved these theorems, but Professor Chugg is going to ask you, how many dB did you save? Right? So we would do a lot of work on communications algorithms, right? And he will ask those. So that's kind of like an impact question, right? Which says, there are these results, but if I'm an engineer who's actually designing a practical system, this is what it's going to mean. As a result, also with my students, when we write papers, even if they are somewhat theoretical, I'll say, say something about the numerical results in the abstract, 30% savings in, energy, or 5 dB better, or 10 times, like, some of these numerical things are what stick with people. But, if you're reducing complexity, power, et cetera, those are forms of impact, right? But it could also be societal. Or it could be, I tried this new idea in a different field. It has the potential to change how this field does something. So you don't want to go too overboard, and that's kind of it's a delicate balance here. And again, reflecting upon some of our recent experiences, we'll have faculty candidates who will all say they're doing machine learning, and then 30% in the talk, you say, this is not a machine learning talk. And so, there are some topics that are hot, but try to be very, be judicious about, how far you label some of your work just to make it look like it's super modern. And not everybody universally believes that machine learning is the solution to everything and is what we should all be doing. So I'll also put that out there.
I know that Professor Gupta may have to.
Yeah, I have to basically. So maybe I can just. Yeah. So I think impact is a delicate thing. I think one area where I would complement what Professor Mitra just said is also the impact can basically be on the discipline. So sometimes you develop a method that other people will use to basically prove other theorems, or you can basically create a sub-circuit that might not have direct societal impact, but that sub-circuit is so. I was having this discussion with somebody the other day, and an undergraduate who was talking, I want to work on a project that has impact. I said, if you go to work for a boring company like Intel, and you basically designed an adder that ran 1% faster, and that made clock circuits of all the clocking of every chip, Intel chip 1% faster, you would have a huge societal impact, but you would basically be somewhere down here. You will never see the eyes of people will not know that you made that impact, and you will not see the eyeballs of people who are happy with your impact. But it will have a huge impact. So I think impact can be basically also downstream to engineering, enterprise in general, products. It can be downstream to other people who basically will pick up your theoretical tools. And a lot of them are hard to predict, but at least you can say, well, with this is an algorithm that I did in the context of this, but it has, I think it belongs to this class of algorithms where I think this idea would probably permeate, and it will also expand into operations research, or it will also expand into this class of problems. And I think my ideas would be useful there. Or I'm making this circuit, analog mixed signal circuit, but it will be part of the system, and it will basically help this class of big chips, and think about that way. So you put the context and describe that how significant a portion of that is, and what can the impact be from there. That perspective.
And you should know, actually, for National Science Foundation grants, when we do our annual reporting, these kinds of questions are questions we have to answer. What is the impact on the discipline? What is the impact outside of the discipline? What is the impact on society at large? And these are actually 3 different paragraphs that you have to write. What's the impact on infrastructure? What is the, so there's
many dimensions of the impact that NSF has identified, and it makes us answer those questions.
Right.
And it's okay for you to say, no, nothing in this category and nothing in this category. Okay. So you don't have to feel obligated to basically say something impact in every area. I have to run. Thank you very much. I'm happy to, Chinyi, you said, I'm happy to answer any more questions by email. Okay. So you guys have any questions, let me know. If anybody wants, ridiculous questions, I can talk to you one-on-one. Okay. So if you want anybody to listen to your talk and give you ridiculous comments and questions, I'm happy to do that. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Cindy. I think we have a few more minutes. I think at least Professor Mitra and I can stick around and answer
Absolutely.
Those. Is the talk going to be on Zoom or?
Yeah, this year we're going to keep it on Zoom. We thought about it, and there's just too many variables to account for if we don't.
We don't know what you don't know. All right, well, I will also be happy to take a look at slides. If folks want me to take a look at them.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I should clarify, both Professor Gupta and Professor Mitra are not judges this year, so they're just volunteering to help any of you and give you some feedback. So,
but we have done it many, many, many times. I will say this will be one of the rare years that I'm not judging.
this is true.
Actually, one last question. What is the typical number of slides you see in these talks? Or like what
No
would
more
be?
than 1 a minute would be my suggestion.
I would say 6 to 7. And this is why practicing is so important.
Yeah.
You
And
know.
that means you also have to think a lot about what goes in those 6 slides, because then your tendency might be to just cram those 6 slides full of stuff, and that isn't the right answer either. Right. And so there is an art to kind of going back and saying, I've done all this work. This is what is important. This will make the best story that will be compelling to the audience, and
Right.
kind of, pull away stuff until you find that core. That's the most compelling part of your presentation.
So let me offer a data point, and I don't know what you should do with it, but I had a collaborator at UC San Diego, a brilliant young information theorist, and we were going over joint work with a student who was going to present it. And Young Hun basically said, I did the math. I spend roughly, in terms of the design, almost 1 hour per slide. And of course, we were talking about a conference talk, which I think was, 15 or 16 slides. And so I don't know if you would actually think about spending 2 whole days on a conference presentation, but the time does matter, right? And so you can do drafts, you can rethink about them, don't leave it to the last minute. We can totally tell if you've left it to the last minute. And of course, your advisors should be helping you as well, in my humble opinion. So,
and your group mates, definitely.
yeah, do it, do it during group meeting, etc. It's Team Mitra or Team Hashemi that should be supporting the students that are going forward and trying for this. At least that's what happens in my group. So.
Can I squeeze in one last question?
Sure.
So just how important is a future plan or like a future, I don't know, vision of my research? How important is it to this talk and also to a future job talk?
I mean, because it's so short, to me, I don't think for this talk it's as important because you just don't have that much time. For a job talk, it is important actually, because we want to be able to see where you're going to go next. And we don't want to see that you're just going to do some epsilon difference, from what you had done in your dissertation. On the other hand, you don't want to necessarily propose things that are too far away from your expertise. So again, it's sort of this balance of leveraging what you know how to do, but making it seem that, it's new, innovative, etc. So I've seen everything from 1 slide to a handful of slides within a 50-minute talk for a job talk. And I'm not sure there's a formula, like a correct answer, but for a job talk, you definitely want to have something there.
For this talk, I would say, this is not a qual exam presentation. Right?
Exactly.
We're not asking you to say, what do you propose to do next? So that's not necessarily the goal. On the other hand, you may have a narrative, and the narrative may naturally lead you to say, these are all the things I've done, and that's opened up these horizons to work on. Something like that. So if that's how your narrative naturally closes out, to point out a couple of directions that you're working on or others are going to be able to work on given your work, I think that would be fine.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, then I guess I'll go to my next meeting. But thank you for attending. It would be useful at some point, maybe let Kathy know, like, was this useful, not useful? Was there something else that you wanted to see? I don't know if we've done this in previous years. This is the first time I've taken part.
It's the first time we've done it, and it
Right.
was kind of feedback that we got last time would be helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I almost wish it was mandatory for anyone who made it through a certain stage to go through something like this, because I think it would help prevent, easily correctable
Yeah.
errors. But it's all good practice.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you again to Professor Mitra and Professor Gupta for having joined us and answered all these questions. I guess we will be in touch with you. Kathy will be in touch with you to let you know about the next stage. And we hope to hear from you. And regardless, I hope that the session was useful. I think you can definitely carry a lot of these lessons to other presentations and other settings and future job talks and so on. So thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and weekend. Bye.
Take care.